Alrighty, so we're now live again, talking about our proposal to deal with MaxPath issues, specifically on the .NET side. I mean, when I announced this on Twitter, like yesterday, I think there were some concerns from the community that we just make things a lot worse by fixing the problem of working around .NET. Do you want to spend like at least 3 minutes talking about our high-level approach to that and why that may not be an issue at all?
So, I mean, long paths are already into the system. I mean, through the both the extended path syntax and also with Java, which does essentially the same sort of thing we're intending to do, which is slapping on the extended syntax when we actually invoke the Windows APIs, with some notable exceptions. One of the ones we're using for getting full path, we don't have to do that. It's one that actually supports arbitrary length paths. So, you know, the general gist is by not forcing people down the road of actually putting long path syntax on, you get the legacy normalization of paths, which is actually more compatible for things than trying to force people down the other route. So,
yeah, I think there were some concerns that this may cause buffer overruns in other apps, but I mean, the point is that people pass in MaxPath as a constant for the buffer, right? And so in the same way they failed today getting an error code that says the buffer is not large enough to handle that.
Correct. All the Windows APIs do take a buffer size. So well, it is possible, you know, that you could be calling some unmanaged code somewhere that takes a max path that you have a dependency on. There's no guarantee that like you're not going to leak in a string that's more than that.
Yep. You
really should be checking it always on your own case, you know, when you actually go out. You may get lucky and have like path get full path and throw for you at some point, but
yep.
That's really what it is. It's
so
just
things
luck.
that are broken today continue to be broken the exact same way, whether we do the work or not.
And it's becoming more and more of a pressure on people to actually have long paths.
Yep.
We did it was Node.js was having a bunch of issues with this and did some temporary workarounds for this, for the long path issue.
So this is the proposal that you sent here. You want to walk us through it?
So this one is just talking about like how we deal with relative paths, and this is like the path get full path piece. One of the other limitations that's in Windows is that at least currently, you know, set current directory and get current directory are limited to max path. There is no way to get it beyond that. And that's not likely to change anytime soon. On top of that, you know, it's also recommended that you don't rely on get or set current directory because it is a process-wide setting. And, you know, it's not friendly for multi-threaded applications, which is everything these days. Even if you only have a single thread in your own code, there's lots of other code running at the same time as well. So we need to deal with that for those two reasons. One of the things that we want to offer, and there are similar things that are already available on the shell, at least the most current shell APIs, as far as like Windows 8, is an overload that lets you specify what the base path is going to be so that you can deal with that yourself. You can get around the problem completely, and also of threading and being a process-wide issue, and also get around the problem with the long paths. So it's the recommended way to do things.
And what is on down low? Like what happens? Or this only exists on Windows 8 or?
No. The shell APIs that do the same sort of behavior.
Oh, okay.
So this will be available all the way from the bottom up. This behavior has been there since at least Windows XP. At least the full path name is the underlying Windows API that we end up calling one of them. So from an API surface area perspective, there would be like another overload for get full path that allows you to pass in two strings, the base path to use instead of the current directory, and the path as you've normally passed it in the past.
The second one's already existing, right?
Yeah, the second one exists already, but we're going to change behavior a bit in here. And
for the first overload of the base path, is there assumptions that it'll be validated, that it's rooted or whatever, just kind of things like that, already full paths?
Yeah, in the exception details, I say if it's not rooted, then we'll throw an exception. It needs to be rooted. We're going to be passing that in. I think I put that under argument exception. Yeah, base path and not an absolute path. I added that to that. So,
So base path has to be called
has to be rooted.
Yeah.
I mean, or it's indeterminate at that point, so it doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
Should we actually add an argument, exception for the paths, such that we shouldn't allow them to pass full absolute paths in the second parameter? Seems a little counterintuitive. Sometimes you'll get it, it'll do something fancy, sometimes it won't.
What?
Should we make it a statement that says path must always be relative to the second parameter there?
No, because
you. Right?
yeah.
I know, and that's always been a source of like, what the heck is going on?
Well, conceptually, this is meant to mimic the same thing as setting the current directory and then resolving the path. So otherwise, users are going to have to figure that out on their own, and there's not really a current behavior when you resolve a path. It doesn't matter whether it's relative or not. What matters, the APIs don't care. It's just like what happens to it is what changes, right? If it is happen to be fixed, then it will actually use the base path. If it isn't, it won't. And we'll call that out very explicitly. And also call out there's quite a few details in here, like about how the behavior works and like why you might want to use path combine instead in certain scenarios. So
That was my next question. Yeah.
So, and clarify also on that end as well, and I have that in here. Like it's a call out in the design and other considerations, and that's really where we should be spending most of our time from this point.
On get full path, are we going to replicate there's the funny path combine behavior when you do C: versus C: /?
No,
We're not going to replicate that crazy?
no. So he's talking about drive relative paths, and I talk about this in the design and considerations piece. So like, want to go into that because we actually are going to be pressed for. And I want to start actually with just basic paths. We'll talk about extended paths after we talk about like non-extended path or using the extended path prefix, because that's a lot more complicated. So, you want to scroll forward to the design and other considerations. So some of the remarks here are just actually a combination of a few extra pieces in the existing remarks. I called out the new content, but the design considerations are there. So, as I say here, it's intended to be functionally similar to setting the current directory and then calling get full path without actually setting the current directory. And generally speaking, this path should not actually touch the disk ever. Now, and this is like when you're getting an absolute path, this is kind of the convention that's out there, right? Like the idea is that you're not doing disk IO. This is meant to be a string manipulation. Now on the Windows side, we have one caveat to that, and that's we try to normalize short paths, and that can't be done without actually seeing if there is a short path. So that behavior will be in there, but that would be the one piece outside of this. So there are other things that you don't want to do. We don't want to follow links. We don't do that right now. So we got to make sure the Unix side doesn't do that as well. This is not meant to be the final path. This is meant to be full path. Absolute path is meant to be an unambiguous path from a root to a location.
But not cleaned up and normalized at all.
It's normalized in the sense that like there are like relative pieces are taken out, and as far as legacy Windows things are, certain pieces are taken out, right? So trailing periods, spaces, things like that. And I'll call into those details. That's the same stuff that full path name does on Windows, which is collapse the relative segments and do minor cleanup of the individual segments, which is again like a trailing period and a few other cases. I call them out at the bottom. But
you have to hit this to collapse the other places too, the dots and stuff.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's the relative segments are getting collapsed.
You have to hit the disk to do that, though, right? No,
That's just string manipulation.
just doing it straight. Okay.
So full path does not hit the full path. Get full path name for Windows does not hit the disk.
So is that the difference between path.combine and get full path, that one does normalization and the other doesn't?
So path.combine is simply string plus string. Throw a directory separator in the middle if it doesn't have one. So it doesn't do anything at all. No collapsing of segments.
No, I understand that, but in terms of like functional behavior, combined isn't going to be any different than get full path in terms of what you can do with the resulting path. It's just that get full path will end up normalizing.
Correct. That gets you the absolute path, as it were. And that's
Well, it's only going to give you an absolute path because you gave it a rooted base path.
correct.
Which, so if you gave combine a rooted base path as well, it would give you an absolute path.
Yes. For the first
Okay,
path.
so again, the only difference is one does normalization, the other
Well,
doesn't.
it's not absolute in the fact that it still has relative segments. That's not considered absolute. It is rooted. That's the difference. So it's subtle, but that's rooted. They're both rooted. Absolute is only what you get from the get.
It might be worth defining what absolute path means then.
Absolute path means there's no relative segments in it any longer, and it's rooted.
Where's that defined?
Hmm?
I mean, like,
Absolute-
you're saying that an absolute path couldn't have a ... slash in it, for example?
You just blue screen.
No, the machine is still there. I have no idea.
We lost. Can you still hear?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We lost the connection.
Hello, testing.
Oh,
1,
I
2,
also
3.
lost it. Never mind. I'm just trying to
Display driver crash.
Oh, weird, but why the heck did we lose the sound in the process?
Is that going to range?
You know, one time we'll have a meeting unadjusted.
And we'll start right on the hour too.
Can you guys hear me?
That one is possible because previous meeting ends sharp and then new one starts. And unless you can instantaneously transport